Medusa was at the reliquary that night. You don't intend to confront her directly, do you?
I'm not sure. Isn't she dangerous?
Even if she's not actually involved in Calliope's death, yes. Still, while I hate to say it, confronting Medusa may be your best option.
You could come with me when I talk to her.
Trust me, if I'm anywhere within a mile, she'll have vanished by the time you so much as knock on her door. Just lie to me and say you'll be careful. On a different matter, I've had time to do some thinking. After Aphrodite's party, we never really spoke about the Eidolon and Calliope's memories. No doubt you have many questions.
Apollo told me a little about it. He did say I should talk to you, though.
Did he now? Is there anything you'd like to ask?
When all these memories start to return, will I feel different?
First, you'll have dreams. Places you've never been, people you've never met. But unlike with normal dreams, these will linger. Then they will come while you're awake. Sudden flashes or snippets of déjà vu. And sometimes it will seem so real you'll swear you're hallucinating. If there's anything difficult about the process, is that it becomes hard to differentiate between your life and all these other lives you're now recalling.
It does sound confusing.
Confusing and often unpleasant, as not all the memories will be fond ones. But that will pass in time.
You said it becomes hard to differentiate your life from the others. How hard, exactly? It'll still be me, right?
Oh, how do I explain this? Grace, would you say that you are who you are because of your experiences? The things you've lived and done?
I guess so, sure.
Well, all the things Calliope has done, and those before her, will now be yours. They will feel like a part of your life as well. Thus, they can't help but shape you. The Grace that is now will be and will have done so much more. Fortunately, you don't have to deal with every memory. Each time the Eidolon passes on, the oldest memories fade, and that helps.
How many times have you died? Can I ask that?
We call it passing on. I've lost track of just how many times I've passed on my Eidolon. A dozen? It's happened less often in more recent eras.
And the one you told me about, the woman married to that gangster, she was the most recent?
I don't think of Chastity as a she. That was me, just as the one my husband blasted with a shotgun was also me. It was one of the few times I wasn't able to prepare my successor. We were friends, yes, but I didn't know what Persephone was, and I had no idea what I'd just become.
That must have been difficult.
It was more difficult taking over my dead husband's territory. Women weren't often mobsters in those days.
Were you really a gangster? I've heard it said, but it sounds...
Let me put it this way. I felt as if I'd been blessed by a dying woman who saved me from a prison of my own making. I didn't know what I was, but I was free. I felt more alive than I'd ever felt before, and strong enough to toss an ox 10 feet. Did I set out to become a mobster? Not exactly. My husband's friends thought I'd murdered him, however, so they came after me, and one thing led to another.
Oh, I see.
Athena found me just as my memories were starting to return. I wasn't permitted to continue doing something so noticeable, so I was carted off to Olympus. It's too bad, really. I was an excellent mobster.
It's a lot to consider. Assuming I'll even have time to worry about it, what with the trial coming.
Either the trial will end poorly, in which case all of this is moot, or it will end well, and you will have plenty of time to digest.
Yeah, thanks for the update.
I'm a realist, Grace. It's what I'm best at. Now then, unless you've something else to ask.
I'd like to know a little more about the idols. I am one now, right?
What constitutes a little more in this instance?
Well, what are we? Where did we come from? If an idol is a soul that moves from person to person, it must have started somewhere, right?
Ah, the big question. To which the answer is, nobody knows. I remember the original Persephone only vaguely. Indeed, I'm not even certain she was the original. Was there something before her? How did she get her eidolon? I couldn't tell you. Evidently, we wrote little down in those early days, or were forbidden to, and our memories only stretch back so far. Anything beyond that simply isn't.
Psst. Isn't it strange to not know where you come from? For all you know, the idols could be aliens.
Aliens? Grace, you watch too many movies.
Gods are okay, but aliens are just wacky fiction.
Fine, yes. It is strange. Our earliest days aren't the only blanks in our memories, however. We have many. And the last was the day Zeus called us all together to tell us Rome had fallen and we should prepare for war. But did that war occur? I couldn't tell you. The last thing I remember after Rome was 1,000 years later, in the 16th century. I was in a different body, feeling as if no time at all had passed. Athena calls that period the gap. That's what it feels like. All of us experienced it, and not one of us knows why or how.
The gap you mentioned. What was that like? Did you just wake up one day, or...?
I wasn't asleep. I lived. I had lives. I passed on my eidolon. I may have known who I was and what I was, but perhaps I was completely unaware. All I know is that one day, Athena came to my nunnery, near Trieste, I think. The moment that I saw her, all the old memories came flooding back. My life during the gap was wiped away in an instant, and it never returned. If someone did that to us, they were powerful indeed.
What about Athena? I mean, she's the one who found you, right? She must have been aware.
Athena woke up on her own, or so she claims, and spent the next century rounding up those idols who remained. Zeus, however, was gone. What became of him, what happened in Rome, we've never pieced it together. It's troubling.
Are you willing to talk about Hades? If you don't want to, that's fine. I'm just...
Incredibly curious how I ended up murdering my husband.
That, yeah.
One might think that my hatred of Hades began when he kidnapped me and forced me to be his bride. But honestly, that wasn't it. I hated my brothers and sisters for letting it happen, but Hades himself terrified me. He had a presence. One that forever made him the most important man in the room. And me? Oh, I was nothing in comparison. When Hades began doting on me, trying to earn my favor, I swooned that he might deign to think of me that way. For centuries, I actually thought I was in love, that the kidnapping was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's funny how our perspectives change.
Tell me more about Calliope. You and her were good friends, right?
We were.
And
if you had told me a decade ago that I would become close to one of the muses, I would have laughed in your face. I always considered them Apollo's creatures. Calliope, Clio, and Talia. Vapid, frivolous gods who handed off their eidolon to any artist who took their fancy. Every time I met one of them, they were someone else. Apollo called them the Sisters of Beauty, no matter their gender. Can you imagine that? That's such a stupid name.
I never thought of that. Do idols change gender a lot?
Well, we tend to seek out successors like ourselves, but it happens. With the muses, it happened frequently. Everywhere Apollo went, they surrounded him like a gaggle of ducklings, just like him to gather his own fans.
If you disliked the Muses so much, how did you end up becoming friends with Calliope?
She sought me out. She'd become more and more unhappy on Olympus, so she decided to leave just as I had, long before. Calliope asked for my help, and I laughed in her face. Go ask one of your sycophant mortals, I told her. I mean, surely one of them has some threadbare couch you can sleep on.
Wow.
Typically, she was undeterred. She didn't just want a place to stay. She said she wanted to learn how to be truly independent from an idol who had mastered it. What can I say? I mean, I am a sucker for a well-timed compliment. I took her in. Apollo was furious. He and Calliope were barely speaking, but he was certain she'd come crawling back to Olympus. Oh, it made taking her in all the sweeter.
After you took Calliope in, that's when you became friends?
No, not right away. I wasn't looking for a friend. What I was looking for was an opening act in the club. Calliope entertained here for years, and then eventually turned from performing to attracting new acts. She was in her element. She and I, we warmed up to each other eventually. She was more capable than I expected, and I adored her furious rants.
Calliope didn't seem like the furious type when I met her. That's hard to picture.
Oh, then you didn't really meet her. She was an idealist, and nobody could ever quite live up to her standards for very long. Her brothers and sisters, least of all. The idols needed to change, she said. They were withering away in the shadows, diminished and unwilling to save their own skins. When I joined the chorus, she expected me to change everything, as if I could single-handedly override Athena. I was to be her champion, and together we would bring revolution to the idols. Well, I was yet another disappointment. She left the club, but I gave her a place to live. We were supposed to stay in touch, but you know how it went from there.
What happened to the other muses? You mentioned 2 others. Were they lost in the war?
One of them was, though not like you think. The day we were to leave on the ship, Talia simply never showed up.
Do you know what happened to her?
We never heard from her again. Apollo thrashed about in mourning, but Talia had been fading away for years. It wasn't a surprise to the rest of us.
What about the other muse, Cleo?
Died long before. A victim at the hands of a mortal man, when she no longer possessed the power to bedazzle him. As I understand it, he kept her in a cage as a pet until her eidolon shriveled up and perished. He was dead before she was.
Ugh, that's pretty dark.
Yes, well, we come by our wariness of mortals honestly, Grace.
That's all I can think of for now. I'll see you around?
Oh, yes, that's where I'll be. Around.